the heart has no off flavor, right? You can even take a beef heart, you can blend it, you cut it into cubes and blend it up, and you can have any ground meat dish, and no one would even know it's an organ meat, except that it has far more nutrients than muscle meat. So
Right.
why wouldn't you do that? Like
Right.
as often as you could,
So heart
as
is a
many
good
hearts as you could
place to
find.
start. Like if someone's to experiment with organ meats, you'd be like, let's go for
Absolutely.
heart first.
Yeah, and also like you don't have to go crazy, right? So even if you just have a little bit of liver, and I would definitely want it to be frozen before I blend it, cut it in small pieces, refreeze it for an hour or something. You can blend it and mix it into any ground meat mix, and then anything that's like heavily seasoned, right? So a bolognese, or I like to do stuffed poblanos, or if you do chilies or things like that, right? Like anything that's flavored, that's a great place to start. I think that for if you already are having some organ meats or you want to kind of take it to the next level, I think that with preparing liver, like kind of front and center, a great place to start is just like with like chicken liver tacos, for example. Chicken livers are going to be more mild. It's a smaller animal, but uh, you can just cook those in a pan with whatever taco seasonings you would normally eat, right? If you use cumin, oregano, peppers, like things like that, then that has some really nice seasonings, and you can do all the things on tacos, right? You can do like some sour cream and avocado and like radishes and cilantro, all the seasonings that basically make up for a beautiful meal, right? Like when you have like just liver or something, it can be really overwhelming, but that's like part of a beautiful package.
Yeah, this
That
is such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. And oh my gosh, we had a conversation booked in a while ago, but I completely get you when you need to get in contact with me and you're like, Tam, I can't do this conversation right now. Like I need to take a step back and I just need to recover and rest and just have some time. So this conversation has been like in the calendar for a while and I've been looking forward to it. So I just want to say a huge thank you, first of all. How are things over there?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah.
Things are great. We
Mhm.
started school and I was just kind of running with my own little projects and stuff. And then I all of a sudden I realized like, whoa, I have to shift gears. Like I really need to lean into my family. Like coming back into homeschool after summer, summer is very open-ended and free range. And there's still
Mm.
some activities that we do, but um, like it just requires a little bit of discipline to like do
Yeah.
that shifting gears with the kids. And so really just the presence, right? All
Yeah.
the, quality time comes from quantity time. And so just
Mhm.
being there and showing up is like how to lean back into that in my
Yeah.
experience. And I actually had been missing cooking actually. When I get too busy, I feel like that, like culturally it seems okay to do something simple, but actually I feel like it's not a way to be for our
Yeah.
family and our home. So I needed to just lean in and go back to my kind of weekly meal schedule, and also just think about like how to put like a full meal on the table like
Mm.
every day for
Yeah.
several weeks. And
Yeah.
so I had kind of been leaning into that, and it's just so good for me to work with my hands in that way.
Right.
And also to have that time in our home and in the kitchen, and it's a really inviting space. I feel like it does like kind of connect everybody and pull everyone back together.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I've been leading into the last few weeks, but I
Um,
am so grateful that we were able to find a new date and
Me
that
too. Me
we can
too.
connect.
Yes, totally. And we were discussing just now, we're just having a really great chat about family and I love your values and you have a big family, you have 4 children to feed, a husband, and
Mm-hmm.
I love how food is at the center. That's the impression I get because we're going to be talking about organ meats today and the importance of organ meats. We're going to geek out because I think an episode like this is really warranted where the podcast is at the moment, because I think having organ meats and fermented foods and all of those traditional ways of eating in our diet is more than just, oh, that's how we used to eat. Like it's actually, what I'm actually realizing is it's actually necessary to bring them back and to start to include them in our diets more, because that there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason why they were there in the first place. And taking them out of our diets and not having them as much, like who knows what detriment that will be. Like less nutrient density, less gut bacteria, and less microbes. And so I'm really on this kind of train at the moment. So there's no better episode to have than to just geek out on organ meats. And you are a specialist. You're an absolute specialist in cooking organ meats. So I love that food is at the center of your family. It's the center of your values. Um, so I guess what I wanted to know is, you're from off your kind of business is Offaly good cooking, which I absolutely love. It's such a good play on words. So how did you kind of come about with that? And because I feel like you have, would you say it's an obsession with
Um,
organ meats? What would you call it?
it's
A
definitely,
passion, an
yeah,
obsession?
it's a definitely passion. It's
Mm.
just part of kind of like a bigger value set, I would say.
Mm.
I came to, eating whole foods similar to most of us, right? I had just like destroyed my health. There was, of course, a rock bottom story there. Things were not good. And then I, kind of learned about a friend of mine actually recommended that I read Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. I'd never heard of the Weston Price Foundation or anything like that. I'd never heard of this book. I checked it out at the library. I read it cover to cover. I put down that book and I was like, whoa, I was reading the book. I was like telling my husband things are going to change, things are going to change, things are going to change. And I like literally closed the page, like the last page of that book. And I like went and I threw out half the things in our pantry. And I literally drove like 3.5 hours that night to buy raw milk in Illinois, where on-farm sales are legal. And that was the only place I could get it. So, and I started going every Friday night. It was kind of a ritual to like drive to this farm, a couple of hours from our house and bring it back at the end of the work week and at the end of the week. And it was pretty life-changing, but I there are many themes that resonate in that book, that they properly prepared grains and that they all had fermented foods and things like this. But the thing that I found, the thing that resonated with me, the thing that I heard when I read that book was that, well, two things. One was that these traditional peoples that had robust health had 10 times the fat soluble vitamins in their diet and 4 times the minerals, right?
Wow.
So this is a huge difference, and that the fat soluble vitamins were in what was considered in every tribe sacred foods. So
Mm.
all these cultures were in different places, right? The North Canadian Indians to Polynesian islands. And so these people were eating vastly different diets, but what they all had were sacred foods. And these sacred foods were, prized for conception, fertility, for, longevity, robust health, like all the things. And so I kind of knew when I read that book, when I closed it, I was like, okay, we're going to do all these things, but I felt like I had been eating healthy for a long time, right? Like we had always had a lot of fruits and vegetables. I actually grew up in a home where my mom did cook from scratch. We had a huge garden. We just had so many fruit trees in the backyard. We did a lot of baking, but we had a real connection to food and seasonal and local and all that. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, so that is a place where you can really lean into that food culture.
Right.
Like the kind of the Alice Waters culture of like
Yes.
whole, simple, seasonal, local foods. And so that was not foreign to me, but I was like, wait, there is this missing piece. And this missing piece is the sacred foods. Like, where are these? They're totally absent from our culture. They're definitely absent from my life. And so we made all the changes, right? We got raw milk. We had been baking a lot. We started literally when I got my copy of Nourishing Traditions, I wore thin the pages of like soaked and sprouted grains, right? Because I wanted to maintain the foods that we were already having, right? So I just like started like, okay, so now we can have pancakes and waffles, but we'll just like ferment them first. We'll soak them overnight and we'll do all the things. So these pages are like literally falling out of the book. But I was like, I knew in my heart of hearts that our restoration, my own restoration was not going to happen from soaking and sprouting grains. Like that was not the through line. The through line was the sacred foods. And the fact is that my husband and I can see the immigrant generations on both sides of our family. So my husband was actually born abroad. His father was raised in a rural area in the northeastern corner of Iran, tucked in between Turkey and Azerbaijan. He did not have pasteurized milk until he went to college in Tehran at age 20, right? So he like grew up in and like just a very different time and place. And so he has all of his living stories about what those food cultures were like. And then my mom was the firstborn of 3 children to immigrant parents. She grew up with all these foodways. So when the thing about Weston Price is when I read this book and they're talking about these sacred foods and they're talking about what, real food and healthful food looks like, the animal fats, the fat soluble vitamins, nose to tail, I was like, wait, like I've heard these stories my whole life. My mom, of course, saved us from having to eat those foods because she was part of a generation of assimilation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she really wanted to speak. When she started school in kindergarten, she didn't speak a lick of English. She was the only non-native speaker in her class. So that experience like defined a lot of her ways. She was really trying to separate from that past, right? And like not be part of it and really to be American. And so she associated a lot of the foodways also, like these weird foods that they ate were part of like a culture that that she was trying to separate from. So, now people come and they really want to hold on to their heritage. And I think that I'm part of a generation of people that may also want to kind of restore their ancestral heritage, right? So when I learned about this, I was like, wait, this is the way my mom talks about my grandma fed them liver like 1 week or 1 day a week, like every week of her life, pretty much. And my dad, when he started dating my mom, would always come around for liver night. Like he would never miss a liver night in my mom's house. When I started cooking like this, there was actually, I do have one post from many years ago where it's a tongue dish and it's in a broth. And I remember eating that, and on the bottom of the bowl is like all the little fat droplets, like red, like fat droplets. And to me, like that is like the epitome of like what I remember about my grandma's cooking, was just that every plate was just like laced with fat at the end of the meal. And of course, like a lot of paprikas and oregano, fresh herbs, mints, like things like that. And so, but just like those red fat droplets from like all the paprika and spices and everything, and garlic and red wine, like red wine in every dish, right? So I was like, oh my gosh, this is real food. You know, what is food if it's not like seasonal and local and having a deep connection?
Yeah.
And so for me, like when I learned about these things, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to incorporate these sacred foods. And so my mom was really my best source of information, because she had grown up eating all of these things. You know, she grew up with literally crocks of salted pig parts, like in corners of their house, right? Because my grandparents came from the old country and used the entire animal. My mom said that, you know, she hated these foods. She hated eating liver. She hated brains. She thought it was so weird. She definitely thought that they ate all these things because they were poor, because they, you know, she thought they were poor and they spoke a different language. They were different from all the other kids in the street that were having TV dinners in the 50s, you know. At some point, my grandparents took the girls back to Portugal for a year. And it was actually when the Bay of Pigs crisis was escalating, and my grandfather like left the country because he didn't know if we would go to war. And so, you know, that came out afterwards. But they drove across the country and they took a ship to Portugal with their car, and they spent a year in Portugal. And so they like got to know the old country and all this stuff. And my mom says that at some point they went to the island of Madeira, which is where my grandmother's from, and they stayed in this like castle, like hotel. It was a castle, you know, former castle. And then they were there, and it was a really fancy place, like a beautiful hotel. And they went into the restaurant like the first day, like morning or evening, I don't know. And she said that there was like brains on the menu, like 3 different ways. And she was mortified because she was like, I just couldn't believe that like these fancy rich people were eating brains. Like I always thought we ate brains because we were poor, like because we had to, you know, like it's horrible food that nobody else ate. And so this is like really her story, but it was imprinted on me, right? So when I was like, oh my gosh, we have to eat the ancestral foods, I was like, oh, like we're all in. Like this is like actually a preservation of my heritage and my culture. And I can see it in my husband's family, like absolutely, like all of the Persian lamb dishes. And so I was like, we're all in. We're going all in.
I feel like having organ meats is considered weird these days, because people
Right.
look at it and they think, what, brains, what, heart, you eat, you know, you eat kidneys, like we kind of have this disgust around it, but it doesn't make sense, because like for our ancestors, and even up until like our grandparents, like they were eating organ meats, and like you said, even your parents. So it's almost like our generation, maybe our parents' generation as well, for in the most part. That's when things changed, the relationship changed with organ meats.
Right. Well, it's like my mom, right? She really wanted to save my sister and I from those foods. So I remember growing up, like we would go to cousins' houses and they would slaughter a goat in the backyard, and we would eat that whole goat. But I never ate the organs. I don't know what happened to those, but I'm sure that there were some old ladies in the kitchen, like aunties, that were like taking that stuff down. And my mom's like, you guys don't have to eat that weird stuff. Like, oh, I hated that stuff. And even to this day, my mom won't eat anything. And she came to my first conference talk at the Weston Price conference in 2019, I guess. And she was like, oh my gosh, like these people really like you, Janine. Like, what's wrong with these people? Like, why do they want to eat this stuff? And so I think it is like really natural, right? Like that we have a whole generation of people that either don't know what it is or kind of grossed out by it, or, you know, because like they just haven't had the opportunity to revisit like the bigger picture.
Right.
And so when that presented itself to me, I was like, whoa, we are all in.
And I love how, you know, you're on a mission to change the way people think. And I remember me and you were talking, we were messaging each other before this, and we were kind of arranging to talk. And you said, I don't know why, but I feel really compelled to just teach everyone about organ meats, and that passion really comes through. So I think that's amazing. You've mentioned Weston A Price quite a few times, and I have to say, anybody who's listening, they have to know about the power and the impact that Dr. Weston A Price has had on our nutrition and the way that we see it. So basically, Dr. Weston A Price is the early 1900s, right? He
Yeah.
decided to go travel around the world to go to kind of different what would you call them, local native tribes or like
Well, he was looking for people that
communities.
didn't have cavities, right? He was a dentist
Exactly,
in
right.
Cleveland, and he was like, all these people in my office have all these cavities. Like,
Mm.
how do we resolve cavities? And there was all this speculation in the dental field, research about this thing and that thing. Is it too much acid or too much or too, this, is it the sugar? Is it this? And then he was like, why don't we just find the people that don't have any cavities and see what they're doing?
Mm.
Right. So this was like his, and then he went around the world to find these people. So he would go to places that were fairly remote, and then he would ask like, where are the most remote people? And then he would like travel these far distances to
And
come in
study their
contact. And
diets, like have a look at what they were
right,
eating. And his book that he wrote, Nourishing Traditions, not Nourishing
nutrition
Traditions,
and physical
Nutrition,
degeneration.
Physical
Right.
Degeneration. That is a heavy book. Like that
It
is,
is.
it's a hefty read. And the fact
It
that you
is.
read
It's
that
a
from
research
page,
tome.
right, if from cover to cover, you read that. I got about halfway through before I kind of thought, okay, right, like I think I'm
I
done with
got
that for
it.
now. Like I'll come
Yeah.
back to it. But it's really incredible what he found. And he just collated all of this information about what the reason why these people in these communities, why they didn't have any cavities. They had the most amazing teeth, the most
Hmm.
amazing like mouths, like they didn't have
Yeah.
any crooked teeth. He even said that their personalities were really calm and like happy. They were robust, strong. So he was like, it must be coming down to the diet. And so basically, the his work and the Weston A Price Foundation, which you present for and you do some work with, is all about getting back to our the way that our ancestors ate, like these
Hmm.
communities that Weston A Price found. So I find it really fascinating, and that's a heavy read. So well done for getting through that. But
Thank you.
you refer to organ meats as sacred foods. So you said it a few
Absolutely.
times. It's on your website, and it's basically something that you refer them to as quite loosely. Now, anybody listening to that would be like, "What? Like, what sacred foods? Just liver, kidneys, brains? Like, what the hell is she talking about? Like sacred foods?"
Right.
But I see, but there's truth in that. So can you tell me why you refer to them so quickly as sacred? Why are they sacred foods?
Right. Well, I mean, for me, it was really like kind of tied to an information piece. Like I said, that he found that these communities had 10 times the fat soluble vitamins than Americans in the 1930s. So, and then where do we find, like, we can't find fat soluble vitamins in muscle meat, for example. Like, they're absent. So, we can find fat soluble vitamins in full fat dairy, in eggs,
Hmm.
in actually in all of the arthropods. Arthropods, a class of animals like insects. And so the insects of the land and the sea. So there are cultures that have eaten a lot of insects in Africa, even in Mexico. You can go down if you're like going to go hike a pyramid. They'll have like the person selling like little fried crickets on the side, right? Or but also we're more comfortable with the insects of the sea, which would be like crab, lobster, things like that. Unfortunately, we're at a place where if I were to go and buy those at the store, all of the tamale, as it is called, would be removed. So it's actually really hard to find. But growing up in coastal California from a Portuguese family, like we definitely ate a lot of that too,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
But
Yeah, so I think that
yeah,
those sacred
yeah.
foods were like the denominator. I was like, okay, so you can get them in other places, but the fact is that to get the same vitamin A is like such a
And really, a vitamin
orchestral.
A, yeah, vitamin A is at its richest in organ meats,
It
especially
is. So you
liver,
would have to
right?
eat 87 eggs in the course of a week to get the same amount of vitamin A as in one serving, 1 3-ounce serving of beef liver.
Wow.
So that's a pretty big difference. So I know that some people are like, oh, I'm eating eggs, like even like a half dozen eggs for breakfast, like
Yeah.
carnivore community kind of like, oh, I've got enough. I mean, maybe, but it's like, that's a pretty big gap. I mean, it
Yeah.
also depends on where you're coming from. Like if you've had, if you've been eating some vitamin A rich foods for an extended amount of time, but
Yeah.
in the absence of these foods, it's hard to imagine. Also, you can get some vitamin A precursors from plant foods, but
Mm.
about half of us don't have the genes to be good converters of those. And some people
Yeah.
are very compromised in their conversion. I imagine I must be one of those people because when I came to this work, I had all the telltale signs. I mean, of just
Right.
being extremely vitamin A deficient.
Wow. And
So
so
like,
so I can imagine your motivation behind all of this is would you say that the fact that you started eating organ meats, you started introducing it into your diet for your family, yourself, did you see health improvements in yourself?
oh, absolutely. I mean,
Right.
organ meats
There's that
are the
motivation. Yeah.
absolutely. I
Yes.
mean, that is the thing that I think is like really truly changed our health. And we can take them out for a little while, right? If there's like something gets in the way and like we're not preparing them or I don't have access to them for some amount of time, it like I do feel like, and we're doing all the things, right? Like eating ferments regularly, raw milk, like we only eat grains that have been sprouted and soaked, like all that stuff. We don't have any seed oils in our home. We hardly ever eat out. I mean, all the stuff. But without those foods, I mean, I definitely
Mm.
notice a difference. Like
What
I
difference
don't
do you notice? Because I feel like
just
I need some of that in my life, and
yeah,
anyone
I mean, I
listening
just
probably
feel like
feels the
it's all
same.
the
What do we get
energy.
when we eat organ meats? Like, what do we
Well, so
expect?
much clarity, right? Focus and
Oh,
concentration.
yes. Need
Um,
some of that. Yeah, for
right.
sure.
And I mean, I definitely feel like these are energy foods. I actually,
Mm.
I have several recipes on my site as well for raw meats. I do feel like that was like the thing that was like so weird that I was like, we have to, that like those are the things that seem really weird to our culture. And where I was like, you guys, we can do this again. It's not that weird, right? They have
Mm.
carpaccio in Italy, they have tartare in France, and they have pho in Southeast Asia. And, you know, all these people are using these raw meats in many ways. So we can incorporate them again and the organ meats. Yeah. And then, of course, there's all of the, you know, I think that in general in our culture today, we suffer from a lot of chronic illnesses. And I believe that so much of what's going on with our body in all of these different states is just that we are not signaling abundance,
Mm.
right? So if we're not signaling
Interesting.
abundance, then we'll retain weight or we will shut down our fertility or, you know, our reproductive systems
Yes.
or our immune system, our digestion, like all of these things start to break down when our body feels compromised. And so
Exactly.
the way to communicate abundance is both to eat enough food and then to eat the, you know, enough nutrients.
I completely agree, because the typical westernized diet is heavily processed. And I actually remember having a podcast with Sally Fallon Morell, and it was a fabulous conversation. That I love that woman.
I
She's
love that
the
woman.
I love that woman. She's the head of the Weston A Price Foundation. For anybody who doesn't know, and I said to her, you know, in supermarkets there must be about 70% of foods that are processed, like heavily processed, and she's like, there must be more, like it must be more than 70%, because a typical westernized diet is processed. Also, the way that our soils aren't as nutrient dense as they used to be, because we're not engaging in proper farming methods like regenerative farming methods. So really the nutrients that we're consuming is so much less than it used to be, like 100 years ago, let's say. So
Yep.
the fact that you say a westernized diet, you know, it signals that we're not in abundance, I completely agree. And so the
Mm-hmm.
body will hang on to, you know, its resources for as long as it can. But then I believe that having plenty of organ meats in your diet would signal abundance, and then, you know, increased energy, increased concentration. But then also, if someone's looking to lose weight, then this is also a good way to do it, because your
Right,
body
because
is
this is
like,
the signaling of abundance. Like when you
exactly
have
right. I
everything you
like
need
that.
for your cells to communicate properly, like
Yeah.
this is the signaling of abundance. This allows everything in your body to relax and like drop out of flight or flight and
Yeah.
come back into rest and digest. Like all of these are all of the signals, right? So this is what the organ meats are doing, these really
Right.
nutrient dense foods.
Yeah.
And then of course, of course, there's energy, focus and concentration, there's huge mood improvements, mental health. There's just the signaling of abundance. And then the last I would say is like all the beauty aids, right? Like
Mm,
this is the beauty category, right? Everyone has, it's like
love
a
it.
$4 billion industry for basically retinol A skin cream, like acne skin creams. It's
Right.
like people, you're just
Rich in liver,
applying
like vitamin
synthetic,
A.
yeah, synthetic
Yes.
vitamin A on your skin. And actually, like the risk of toxicity is 10 times higher with synthetic vitamin A than it is with real foods. They looked
Right.
at 279 cases of vitamin A toxicity and found that you would have to have 10 times the dose of like real plant foods, right? Because these are super bioavailable and they are embedded in a host of other compounds that our body, like we don't, you know, we know so much, but we don't totally understand the way our body can extract things when they're in a kind of a orchestra of all these
Right.
other
Right.
nutrients. And
Yeah.
so to separate them is it I mean it's a little bit of hubris, right?
Yeah.
Like that we know so much, we can just like pull
Right.
that one nutrient out and you can apply it on your skin and like you'll acne, you know, your acne goes away and it's like all fine.
Yeah.
I mean maybe, but I mean,
But it,
is that single compound addressing all of your vitamin A deficiency symptoms? It's an interesting
yeah.
question. I mean, I really don't know, but
Yeah.
and there's a time and place, right? For some people, that's totally the right path for them, but for
Yeah.
me, I just knew that that was not.
I mean, I feel like the animal kingdom and our ancestors knew, just knew that the organ meats were the best part to eat of an animal.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of in ancient stories as well, you know,
Hmm.
how like in ancient times, the organ meats, they used to be kind of held onto and given to the people who really needed it, like pregnant women and children and anybody who needs to grow and needed to nourish and needs to be looked after, the elderly. The organ meats were kind of saved for that. There's kind of evidence
Hmm.
in kind of scriptures, and the muscle meats were obviously eaten as well, but even
But literally given to the dogs, right? When
right,
there's an
Dr.
excess
Weston
of
A
meat, it's
Price
like
found
given to the
that,
animals.
yeah, with
Yeah.
the Native Americans in early
Hmm.
1900s, the muscle meats, some of them were thrown to the dogs. So I mean, I love steak, I love chicken, I love muscle meats, and it's so good for you. But when it comes to the nutritional element, organ meats are at the top of the tree when it comes to
Absolutely.
how much nutrition you can get for like per bite. It's kind of, you can't compare the two.
Right.
So I guess this kind of leads us naturally on to, so we've been talking about what to expect when we eat organ meats in our diet. So let's look at the nutritional benefits. So we've been talking about vitamin A, which is really, really fascinating. But also, what other nutrients do you find in organ meats that, we would find beneficial to us?
Well, there's such a huge array of
Mm,
nutrients depending on the organ, right? And so liver, of course, is the, nature's multivitamin, the superfood, all this stuff. It's going to have the highest levels of vitamin A. It's going to that would complement your sunlight, right? So
mhm.
vitamin A, D, and K, we also learned really need to be in concert with each other.
They need to be
And
eaten
so
together,
having,
right? Yeah.
right, or just they need to come together in some package. And so traditional peoples would have had a lot of sunlight. And so the vitamin A would have been a complement to that vitamin D. We don't have quite as much sunlight, but if you go back to traditional recipes like Julia Child or Marcella Hazan, or like just like 100 years ago, like how kind of these traditional cultures were cooking, you'll see that they will make a pate and it will literally have a whole stick of butter or a full cup of cream
Mm,
mixed into that. And so if those full fat dairy products were from pastured animals, then those would have the vitamin D from the sunlight of their, them being out on pasture, like stored also in their
mm,
fats. So that is another. It's interesting how those like always go together, or like
yeah.
sort of head cheeses or pâtés or um, like force meats that are in like terrines, for example. It would be like ground pork is often
Mhm.
mixed with organ meats, things like that. So ground that like really high fat ground pork is also going to be like a really good source of vitamin D, for
Yeah.
example, in these traditional preparations. So those go together really well.
So fat
The
soluble vitamins for sure, but then also the water soluble, so the
the
B
water was
vitamins,
exactly.
right?
So and more B vitamins than anything, and they all go together, right? So I'll probably get this wrong if I go through each one, but one of the B vitamins is for the digestion and assimilation and extraction of energy from carbohydrates. One
Mm,
of the B vitamins is for the extraction of energy from fats. One of the B vitamins is for the extraction of energy from protein,
mhm.
right? One of them is for like neurotransmitter synthesis. One of them is for cell repair. So
Yes,
these B vitamins together are
they're
really the work of
essential.
energy.
Yes.
Yeah, like if you're low on energy, I mean, there's a lot of different avenues that we can point to, but one of them is, and this is actually why liver is like such an energizing food, I would say. Well, actually, many of the organ meats, because you get all these B vitamins are going to help you utilize the energy from the foods that you're eating, right? So if you're eating a full diet, you don't have energy, then you're not
Mhm.
extracting that energy properly. And then, of course, the fat soluble vitamins are the ones, those are telling the cells how to communicate in our body. They're basically referred to as hormones in medical literature. They're chemical messengers. So they're kind of doing that work. And then, of course, things like coenzyme Q10, which is very high in heart, but also very high in liver and underappreciated there.
Yeah.
That is a huge antioxidant. So what that is doing is basically reducing inflammation at the cellular level. By
Mm.
reducing that inflammation, you have more energy, right? Your cells can like, of course, there's the copper benefits when we get into the minerals. A lot of people know that like anemia is low iron. Of course, when I came actually, when like one of my root cause symptoms was just being anemic, like for many, many years and going into pregnancy and breastfeeding and all that, and just really struggling with my iron levels. And so liver is a decent source of iron, but it's really the copper that we now
Mm.
believe is like iron kind of being like a general and or as the foot soldiers, and copper
Yeah.
being the general, telling the foot soldiers where to go. So
Yes.
making sure that we have that copper kind of helps us utilize the iron, our red blood cells, all that. So it's another energy source.
And
The
actually,
funny,
just to quickly cut in there, just to speak
yeah.
about anemia. So anemia is so, this is the thing, it's so common, especially with
Hmm.
women, because obviously we give birth and we have the
Right.
menstrual
We give
cycle every
blood
month.
every month. Right.
We literally lose blood every month. So we are the most likely gender to be anemic. And but a lot of us, the blood tests will show it, But then for many of us, it doesn't. And so you could be
Hmm.
walking around like lackluster, hair's not great, poor energy,
Yeah.
just not feeling good, because iron, the whole point of it is that it kind of it builds your red blood cells. So if you can imagine, you don't have as much good quality blood in your body, you can imagine what that can do. And so many of us are walking around with just less iron than they should have,
Well, just
and
less access to it,
just
right?
less
Like it might be
access,
there, but it might be
right,
stored in the
by there, but
tissues
it's
and
stored
it's
in the
not getting
tissues,
into the
correct?
blood.
Yes, right.
And so
So
Morley Robbins actually talks about at the cellular level, like, so there's the whole body level of energy, and then
mm,
there's the cellular level of energy, and that copper is actually the missing piece. So enzymes are, basically where all the component parts are there for a chemical reaction, but it's missing one key piece.
mm,
And so that mineral molecule is usually the piece that will, complete that enzyme. And when that enzyme is available, like when it's available, then a chemical reaction will take place. And
mhm,
so Morley Robbins has talked about how copper is the mineral that is needed for basically the enzymes in our mitochondria
right.
to basically produce water and basically to reap the energy benefits of that. And it's a little bit of a complex chemistry, but I mean at the very core of our cells and our mitochondria, copper from liver in coordination with vitamin A is actually like generating cellular energy at the very finest level.
It
So
was
it's pretty powerful.
it's really powerful. And Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, she said that liver is an absolute resuscitation for anemia. I was
Yes.
just like, wow, that's one hell of a quote. Like, so if anybody feels like they have any symptoms of anemia, um, then including organ meats, including liver into your diet would be a really great thing to do. And to be honest, that's one of the main reasons why I've been so focused on it, because
Hmm.
even though, I mean, standard blood tests don't actually show that if you're anemic a lot of the time. So, but I have the symptoms, I know it. Like, and plus
Hmm.
with my two children, I lost a lot of blood with both of them. And it's funny, my symptoms started after I had kids. So,
Hmm.
that's my motivation for organ meats and for liver especially, to kind of include it in my diet, just to get just to get those those nutrients that I need to help me get over that. But yeah, and also CoQ10. I mean, you say that energy improves. So CoQ10 is a massive component of mitochondria and the energy
Exactly.
powerhouse of the cell. So getting that into your diet is so important as well. So
Also,
yeah.
if we have any oxidation in our body, right? If we have any polyunsaturated fats and they're
Mm,
floating around in our bloodstream and they are, rupturing, and then this is the cholesterol problem, and that's like a whole other
yeah.
vein. But the CoQ10 is basically like going to directly kind of heal those wounds and like repair those
Mhm.
cells and keep them alive long enough to like get out of our bloodstream and into the cells so that we don't have this problem of um,
Right, right.
triglycerides and cholesterol and things like that.
And
So again,
it's
that's like a signaling of abundance
yes,
at
yeah,
its core, right?
yeah.
Or why are the cells not receiving the things that are in the blood to begin with, right? Because they're
Mm,
saying pass it on to the next one, right? I don't want to take it because we don't have enough for everyone. And who's going to kind of, if you're playing that game in your body. So the whole idea of signaling abundance, but this is just liver, right? So
yes.
Frontiers in Nutrition in 2022, they looked at kind of the top foods for micronutrient needs. And, 4 of the top 8 foods were organ meats: liver, kidney, spleen, and heart. But actually 18 of the top 20 foods were animal foods. So, I mean, it's really animal foods are your most nutrient dense bet. And then at the very top of that list is going to be the organ meats. And it's true. And so I have a chart where I kind of put together a bunch of data from the USDA database. And there's plant foods over here, and they're kind of like lighter color. And then there's muscle meat and animal foods in the middle range, and they're kind of mid in color. And then there's the organ meats, and they're much darker in color, right? Because those cuts, like kidney and liver and spleen, and they're like they have all the nutrients basically
Mhm,
down the board. But it's interesting because some organ meats that we're not as familiar with, like sweetbreads or brains, they're basically equivalent to seafood, which we know
mm,
that seafood is very high in minerals and like has these special fats. Um, and it's interesting, like when you look at the color of those bars, you're like, oh, that's actually a really equivalent food. And we also know that like the Plains Indians, for example, they were really prizing the brains and things like that because they didn't have access necessarily to seafood. Seafood will have long chain fatty acids, but that's where in the brains, that's where you find them in animal foods, right? So if you don't have access to those seafoods, you can get the same really essential nutrients for brain health in the brains.
yeah.
I guess that's not surprising. And then things like tripe, if you look at the list, it's like, oh, they don't have a lot of nutrients. Like there's not a lot. It's not a very dark cell like line going down with like every nutrient level. But then you have to think about it, and you think about, well, What about amino acids and like protein synthesis and things like that, right? So we now know that there's this balance of different amino acids. If you eat all muscle meat, then you're going to be really high in some amino acids, methionine, right, which can cause like leading to all-cause mortality. And like we have lots of indications that that may not be a good thing just to have only muscle meat in our diet. But these are the glycine and these other amino acids are going to balance that. And so you'll find that those are really high in these foods that maybe don't look like they have so many nutrients, right? So you can say ligaments, tendons, things like that, they're going to be extremely high in this. And actually what's funny about organ meats is that they are all really high in connective tissue and these other amino acids. And that is actually one of their defining features. And it's also why they can be tricky to cook.
Right.
Because
I was going to
they
say, yeah,
have,
because they have that texture
tissue.
that a lot of people don't like. Yes.
Exactly, or just unfamiliar with.
Yes.
So we don't really know how to prepare it super well. It's a little bit just foreign to us. So kind of becoming familiar with that and knowing it well is like a door to just a whole nother variety of meats.
Totally.
So
I suppose, talking about nutrients, vitamin A toxicity is always a question that's going to come up for people because
definitely
it can be a case of someone can have too much vitamin A in their diet. And actually, I have this story that I found that I want to share with you, and I just wonder if you heard it. So basically, that the liver is very high in vitamin A because that's where vitamin A is stored for humans and for animals. And so basically in the Arctic, the polar bears and the seals, they have even more vitamin A in their liver because of just their shape, their blubber. Like they need as much vitamin A as they can get because vitamin A is responsible for building, right? It's for like putting things like skin and blubber and things. So that's one of the many functions it has. So basically the people who live in the Arctic, they know to not have as much polar bear liver and seal liver because it's so high in vitamin A, and having too much vitamin A in your diet can be dangerous. So they know to kind of stay away from it. But the story is when the Europeans found the Arctic and they started exploring, they ignored the advice of the locals and they were having all of the liver. They were having all of the polar bear liver. They were having it every day, like indulging in it. And it wasn't long before they started to get hideous symptoms. And I'm talking serious vitamin A toxicity. Things like their skin was peeling off, like crushing headaches, and that their guts weren't doing too good, and like just really hideous symptoms, and death for a lot of them. So that's a really interesting story. So not to put anyone off liver. So I guess when it comes to our liver consumption, how much is too much? How much should we be aiming for per week?
We talk about an average, like we talk about the average. The average American is actually vitamin A deficient, right?
Right.
And actually, an American child is actually not because of fortified juices, breakfast cereals, and fortified milk, right? Okay. But the average American adult, more than half of them have micronutrient deficiencies documented in vitamin A, according to the Linus Pauling Institute at Oregon State, who is studying micronutrient deficiencies across every nutrient, including enrichment and fortification, right? And really a focus on how enrichment and fortification are helping us meet our needs. And so most adults, and you can see this, right? Like I'm saying, like the acne skin care is like $1 billion industry, and all these other there's without vitamin A, we actually can have like a hardening of our tissues and our cells. And so, symptoms of vitamin A deficiency could be like common respiratory infections because like the villi here have been hardened and they're not doing their job in their lungs. It could be vaginal dryness or lack of cervical mucus, things like that, like dryness, right? It could be like it's the bumps on the back of your arms, like where the skin is kind of keratinized. Right. And the same thing can happen with men, like, and actually their sperm can be keratinized where it's kind of become hard and it's not like flowing well, and motility is down and all this. So the deficiency symptoms across that range, I mean, these are very common, and we have band-aids for many of these things, right? Like there's like things that are just on the products on the market just for vaginal dryness or just for your skin or these different mental health issues, right? Like we have things that are just addressing those things, but these could be very much related to vitamin A deficiency. And so it's actually quite common. But on the other end of the spectrum, I do think that like carnivore communities, things like this, like we actually starting to see people having an overload of vitamin A because they're eating like upwards of a pound of liver a week or something. Right. And like, how much liver do you need? I mean, this is like, let's definitely dive into this because in our culture where something is good, like more is better, right? And you go back like 1500s, I'm not exactly sure how to say it. Is it Paracelsus or Pericles? Effectively, the quote is something that the dose is the poison the dose is the poison,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
even drinking water can be poisonous or toxic or
Poisonous if you
kill
have too
you,
much.
right? Like we know of
Totally.
people like frat boys, like hazing
Yeah.
people, and then they had took away the alcohol, so they started
Yeah.
drinking water, and like people died
Yeah.
from drinking water. So like, of course you can die from eating an excess of vitamin A. I mean,
Yes.
and the thing is that I think that culturally, like the traditional cultures really had a sense, and they knew that eating livers from carnivorous animals, right? Like a polar bear is a carnivore, and that those would have a concentration of vitamin A that would be much higher than in an omnivorous animal, which wouldn't have such a high concentration because animals, of course, will always go for the liver first, the most nutrient dense things, and so they will have an accumulation that's much higher. So I actually think that, and then you can go into the studies. And so, and there was some question that came out in the 1990s. There was the Rothman study, and there was some question about vitamin A consumption in the first trimester of pregnancy that would lead to some sort of fetal defects. And it is, and if you go into the literature and you read the Rothman study and you look into the journal that it's published in, the next month they have like 8 letters to the editor of like lots of people having questions about the study and the reputability of the study and the methods of the study, that it was all intake forms, none of it was documented, so there's not really a good sense of like how much vitamin A and the sources that it came from and things like that. And we do know from other studies that synthetic vitamin A is like much more likely to lead to toxicity symptoms than true vitamin A in the animal form. So, and then that, I think in the 1990s, in coordination with like just low cholesterol in general and like animal fats being bad for you, like really put a damper on liver as well. And I think that there's a lot of people that even go into pregnancy, the most important time in your life, to have these fat soluble vitamins and have a real fear of it and don't want to. And actually they might eat liver otherwise and say, I'm not going to eat it during this phase because I don't want to risk my child, which is a really fascinating like place that we've come to, like really full circle from generations before, which, thrived on cod liver oil and ate the livers and gave it to kids and always gave it to nursing and pregnant women. And what's interesting now is actually, if you read like the summary of vitamin A research from the WHO, you will find that they are actually giving children, infants, 100,000 IU in a single serving dose with no medicines, because they have found that the benefits far exceed the risk, the benefits to these children and to the mothers. So what they're doing is they're not giving it in the first trimester of pregnancy, because that is where some doubt remains from the Rothman study. And that research has never been able, we've never gone, well, there's some uncertain risk, right? Because we just don't know how the research was conducted, but there was a report that came out of that more information was needed, but we found that this higher level of vitamin A, which was uncertain for many reasons, what actually the level was, and also what other environmental or nutrient compounding things could be involved in that. Like, were those birth defects actually from other factors in the environment? We don't know. And there was not a lot of data, and it was like very poor data. So it's just not clear. But that study like really I think that because of the timing of that study with the cholesterol concerns of the 1990s, and like no red meat and no butter and no eggs, and like it was just like that together like really has put a stamp. And because of that, all of the dietitians in the United States, like even ones that are Weston Price minded, are very limited in what they can say, like how much vitamin A you can eat. But I will tell you that the WHO they take the highest level, like what we consider to be the maximum dose you can take in a week. And they do that for an entire, they calculate a year's worth of that, and they give that in 1 or 2 doses in the developing world in single vitamin A doses. And it is a huge life-saving prevention that happens in the developing world. And you can read more about that in the WHO reports. But so that is fascinating. And so that tells us 2 things. First of all, is that vitamin A and all the fat soluble vitamins are indeed exactly that. They are fat soluble and they are stored. And so accumulation matters. And so if you are deficient in vitamin A, as these people in the developing world are, and you give them a whole year's dose at the highest level, like what these explorers had eaten, or more to infants, that they will actually thrive because they have none in their system, and they will utilize all of it and they will store the rest.
Right.
And so if you have a high level and then you take on a lot more, then now you can definitely start to inch up into places of territory you may not want to go.
Right.
How do people get into that territory? I mean, this is the real question. If you go back and you look at Jacques Pepin cooking liver or kidney, like you can find it on Instagram right now. Like he's serving a 5 or 6 ounce portion of liver, right? This is like a traditional French serving. Like you would serve liver would be like a steak, right? And you would serve it like a meal. Like this would be a meal. It would be like with some Swiss chard and a sauce and like beautiful like capers and red onions and herbs, tarragon. Like this is a meal, and it is a steak. This is not eaten every day. This is something that's eaten like, my mother grew up eating liver like pretty much every week of her life, she says. Probably, it probably was pretty much every week. It could have been every other, sometimes it probably didn't happen. Sometimes there isn't access, right? You can't get the liver. Like this, I think is a sustainable level. And so informed by my own, but like when I started eating organ meats, I was like, we're going all in, right? Like I'm gonna serve liver the way my grandmother did. Like we're having a plate of liver. Like this is what's for dinner, right? Like, I mean, there's a lot of ways to like have people kind of get more familiar with it now and be like, okay, use a blend. Like don't like, freak out your family or anything. Like you don't have to serve it as like a whole meal. You could like just do a little appetizer of it so people can experiment and try it. You can like test it different ways. Just cook one slice instead of cooking the whole package, or something like that. Defrost it in increments. But I don't know. So I do think that I actually do think that there is a very serious risk now, because now we have this culture of like more, like people don't really understand all the nuances of this. They think that something that's good, and it is extremely good, like more is better. So let's just go all in. And I was actually just watching a video on YouTube from some influencers that I really, really love. And they were talking about, how like 4 to 16 ounces of liver a week. And I was thinking, well, that, it's interesting, because if you have a cow and it's about 1,200 pounds, you can take off about 500 pounds of muscle meat. And I know that Bill Schindler talks about this in his book. And, but like the most nutrient dense parts, the blood, the fat, the organs, a lot of this gets wasted and thrown out. But even still, like this is the situation we have today. Then we would want to be eating all of that. And many of those would be like more on sources of vitamin, like kidney is also fairly high in vitamin A. It's not liver, but it also has good quantities of that, spleen as well. So, but okay, you have a 1,200 pound cow, you have 500 pounds of muscle meat, you have a 15-pound liver. That's about 2% of the animal. And if you were to take all the organs together that I can get access to, like I'm not even talking about all the organs, I'm talking about the organs that I've been able to regularly purchase and consume in our home, like tripe, sweetbreads, kidneys, spleen, brains, things like that. Like now you have about 30 pounds of offal, right? So that's about 4% of the animal.
Right.
So if you have, imagine that you have a week of 7 days and three meals a day, that's 21 meals in a week. I mean, one meal out of 20 would be 1 out of 20 is 5%, right? So like if you eat one meal a week, and then it was actually 21 meals, right? So a little less than that's like 4.7%. If you eat one meal of organ meats a week, that'd be about 4% of your diet.
Right.
So like I'm not telling people to like eat like organ meats for like, the other day I did I do every month or two of just like how to cook all the organ meats basically. And it's a free masterclass and you can sign up for it on my site at awfullygoodcooking.com. And so somebody on the call was like, oh my gosh, so do you eat organs like every single day? I said, no, this is just no, like we just, I do probably eat organs more than most, and we cook the other cuts as often as I can get access to them. But there is a question of access. And
how much should we be eating then?
Yeah, so I do think that like once a week is a great place to aim. And like, we always have the question of like what to put on the table for dinner, right? Like every day, this is the grace and beauty of Sally Fallon Morell, is that there's like this fad diet, there's this fad diet, and there's that fad diet, and there's this guy and that guy and the other guy, and they're like telling you, eat this, eat this, eat this. But like, what I love about Sally Fallon is that she put dinner on the table for 4 kids every night for 20 years.
Love that.
So when you've put dinner on the table, I'm only 14 years in. But like you put dinner on the table every night for 14 years, and
you know
it's
what you're
like,
talking about.
What's for dinner? Like you guys come up with something like, what's for dinner? Like, oh, okay, we have another night. Like, what's for dinner? What's for dinner? What's for dinner? Right? Like this is the question. And so don't we all need a little bit more diversity?
Yes.
Like, don't we all need like some fresh ideas? Don't we all need an infusion of like something unique or different or fun? Or scary, right? But just like, don't we just need a little bit more? Like, really the same thing, like every week for 20 years, like you're just going to eat a steak on a plate. That's totally fine for some people. And that's great. But I just think that in the raising children in the context of our culture, when there was years where all my kids wanted, when we were basically grain free, but all my kids wanted in their lunchbox was a sandwich.
Same.
Like that's all they wanted. They just wanted a sandwich. Everyone else had a sandwich. Like, why couldn't they just have a sandwich? I was giving them cans of sardines. I was giving them Tupperwares of soup, warm soup. I was giving them homemade tamales. I was giving them, leftovers, like warmed up leftovers. Oh, they had hot canisters like pretty much every day, right? And then they would have sides like olives or sliced bell peppers or, like sliced carrot, like some vegetable. Never a sandwich, right? Like all they wanted was a sandwich.
Yeah.
And I don't know, so it's just in the context of American culture, like you're going to take your kid to soccer practice and then they're going to play on the team for the whole season. And then on the last day, the whole team is going to do, there's probably going to be junk food like every single week, and you can fend that off. And then at the end of the season, there's going to be like some big party, and then everyone's going to go eat their junk food. And it's like, well, our family doesn't eat that. So like, can I make my own pizza? And like, can we have that? And And how is that going to go? And I have children. I have my oldest son, actually, bless his heart, is like very much like loves being on the outside of things. Like he loved opening, when the kids were in school, like opening his can of sardines in the middle of the classroom and people being like, oh, what is that? And he would like walk, he said he would take the long way to get to the garbage can to throw out the lid,
Yeah.
just to like walk by
I love
everybody to make
that.
sure that every kid in the class, my daughter is like mortified by this. She's just like
Aw.
hates this, right? Like here I took my grandmother and like she's got my mom and her 100%. She's like, oh, mom, like no one eats liver. Like I can't tell anybody. Like I can't, it's just like so, just you really like feel that sense of wanting to belong and be part of
Yeah.
culture. And like,
I
since
mean,
the time she was,
yeah.
yeah,
Go on, carry on.
no, that's it. So it's just like, different kids are going to
Yeah.
experience this kind of relationship with food very differently in the context of their peers.
Yeah.
And for my daughter, it was really important that she had her own cupcake, And so if I could make it from home with the ingredients that I felt like were good for our family and without seed oils and all that stuff, then she could have that. Like at least it still wasn't the same, but at least that was something, right? Like my son, I'm like, we don't need that. I'm not making it for you. Like to hell with everybody else. But like he'd be like, okay, fine. Like I'll just bring my jar of olives. Like I'm good with that. Whatever weird food. But my daughter's like not going to go for that. It's just like she has that sense of like she's very socially aware and I don't know. So I just think that like if you raise a family in modern culture in this day and age, and then you have to put food on the table every single night for 20 years, and what are you going to do? Like you're going to feed them real
I love
food.
that. And it's such a motivation to experiment and, like you said, do something scary. And what a reason to experiment with something new. But how did you get your children to eat organ meats? Like, did you have to disguise it? Did you have to pretend it was something else? Like,
I have to say, Tam, that the real question is like, how did I get myself to eat organ meats? Because
right.
we
Once
started
you
on
do
this
it, they
path,
do it,
and
right?
exactly,
Mm.
exactly. Like people are always like, how do I get my kid to eat this thing? I'm like, well, maybe. I mean, do you eat it? Like, have you found a liver recipe that you love? Because if you don't have one, like your kids are never going to eat that food. And admittedly, in the beginning, I was the one that had the cultural baggage. I was the one that had grown up with my mom saying like, this stuff is horrible. Like I can't even swallow it. The taste, the texture, like everything, so bad. My whole life, I was like, how can I eat this food? It's so cultural. Fantastic Mr. Fox, right? Like one of the farmers is like Farmer Bunsen Bean and whatever. And one of them is like this horrid farmer, this horrid man. And he lives on this diet of donuts and duck liver pate, right?
Mm.
Of course, like this duck livers. And so, or goose livers. And so it's just kind of like brought in these people that like smell bad and are horrible people. Like they're associated with liver in the mainstream paradigm. I don't know. It's kind of funny to me. So, but I was always like, no, I'm like my older son, right? Like, no, this is what we're doing. I don't care what anyone else thinks. But I have to say that back then, 10 years ago, so my kids were too young to know the difference. They were still in my fold, right? They were kind of the end of the house. So they
kind
just
of
ate
grew
the
up with
thing.
it. Yeah.
Right. They didn't know. And I have to say that young children especially have a very keen sense of what their body needs. So we've drifted from how much vitamin A should you eat, but this is what I was going to say is that if you eat real food, I don't think it's possible to have vitamin A toxicity. I mean, your body will tell you. So eating liver is like eating salt. Like if you have a little bit in your hand, you're eating it. At some point, you're like, oh my gosh, this is not sweet anymore. Yeah. It is done, right? And at some point, you like push the liver away and you say, I've had enough.
I mean, it's the same with anything. Like if you have, let's say, a steak, even though it's so delicious and so lovely, at some point you're going to eat it and you're going to be like, I think I'm done. Like nobody kind of thinks about overeating something like that, or like chicken, or usually you overeat on the things that are processed and that are designed to make us want more. Like that's the way it is. So if you stick to whole foods, then like you said, you wouldn't really have to worry about having too much or too little of something. Like your body will find a way. You'll get in touch with what you really want to eat and what your body needs, and that sensitivity you'll have will get sharper. What do I need to, what do I really need right now? What do I need to eat?
Just that like I can't have any. I mean, I think that there's a fine line. There's the beginning where I couldn't eat liver. I had to choke it down. I was gulp it down with sparkling water, chew and chew and chew, and I like couldn't even swallow it. I was just like gulp it down. But at some point I realized like this is a food. I actually started to crave it. I could feel how much better, I could really feel like kind of vitality returning. I mean, I had been so depleted. I mean, I was at a point in my life where I was like, will I ever have fun again? Like, is this really good? Is this drudgery, right? Of having 2 young kids and being completely depleted. Like, I don't know how, like, this is what this is about. Like, how is this going to play out? I just didn't see a path. And I could really have the sense that when the nights that we had liver dinner and I would do all the things, I would skip snack for the kids. I would pick them up. I wouldn't give them snack on the way home. We would move dinner forward, 45 minutes or so. So they weren't so hungry that we were having meltdowns. And then I would feed us an unfamiliar food. And then I would very deliberately, I would just put the carrots in the oven to roast right as I was serving dinner. So it's like,
Right.
oh, of course we have more food. It's just not ready yet. So you
So
just sit with
just
that
have
plate
that
of
first,
food
and
and
then
yeah, and you just eat that in the meantime. And I would actually always come to the table last because I did not want them to sense my discomfort. My
right.
husband, bless his heart, I think because also he grew up um, eating like more traditional foods, and maybe he even ate some of these foods before he came to the United States. That I don't know, he's always had a palate for it and has always eaten everything I've served, and he's been fine with it. So
I have
that
to
blessed his
say,
heart.
I mean, yeah, I completely understand, like you actually, because there was one point where I was eating liver each week, and then I hit a wall at some point. I was kind of sitting there eating it, and then one bite tasted like pond water, like just one bite, and then I was like, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with liver, and I haven't had chunks of liver since. But what I have been doing is I've been kind of cutting it up and putting it into mincemeat,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the flavor is completely like it's completely muted when I do that. So I find if I mix it with other foods, and it's easier.
Absolutely.
I also supplement. I know that food is always the best option, but for the days where I'm
Oh,
just
there's
like,
always a time and place for
yeah,
supplements. Like,
totally. And it's,
I
do
mean,
you
we
know what,
want
it's
to escape
freeze
them
dried, it's
entirely,
good
but
quality, like it's a really great brand that I love. So I absolutely love it, Paleo Valley. I take their
yeah, Autumn
supplements,
Smith is
and
amazing.
gosh, I love
That woman
autumn.
is
Yeah.
like,
Oh,
yeah, I know, so much respect.
so
So
much respect.
I
Yeah.
know. I
So
just think that yeah, there's definitely a time and place for that. And also even to get on your feet, right? If you really are in a place where you're so depleted that you can't even start this process of like cooking meals for your family, let alone organ meat meals for your family, I mean, that would be a pretty good place to start,
yeah.
right? I
So
think that
so I guess this kind of a final question I have then is, what are your big tips for someone who wants to get started eating these foods? What are your tips to get
yeah,
started?
I feel like this is like where the conversation just begins. So,
Yeah, right.
I mean, how do we go from here? But I mean, if you're somebody who has like not incorporated these foods at all, and you're not going to put it on the plate for front and center as like a value set, then I would definitely say start, like you're saying, with mincemeat, right? You can find blend, or you can make your own. You're going to make your own liver blend. Lots of other organs are actually very easy to blend, and you can just blend them and mix them in any ratio. And the heart is so, it's effectively a muscle meat. It has no off flavor. You can just blend heart and serve that
I had
alone.
chicken heart the other day, and I was very surprised. It was very edible. I was like, oh,
Oh, it's so
that's not
delicious.
bad. Yeah,
Right. So
lovely.
chicken heart, we had actually lived in Brazil. We'd been in Brazil a couple of times, and my husband lived there for a year, and then we went together for a year. And that's actually one of the foods that we had exposure to beforehand because it's so common in
Yeah.
the Brazilian like churrasco culture, like having grilled chicken hearts, and they're so good. So we had actually like that was like kind of like not even a thing that was like on the awful list. It was like, oh well, that's the thing our Brazilian friends do, and we had so many times when we were down there, and you know that's just food, right? But then, oh, it's on the organ meat list, and people are like, wait, what? You wouldn't eat chicken hearts? Like, this is an amazing food. It's like, I don't know. It like the heart has no off flavor, right? You can even take a beef heart, you can blend it, you put it and cut it into cubes and blend it up, and you can have any ground meat dish, and no one would even know it's an organ meat, except that it has far more nutrients than muscle meat. So
Right.
why wouldn't you do that? Like
Right.
as often as you could,
So heart
as
is a
many
good
hearts as you could
place to
find.
start. Like if someone's to experiment with organ meats, you'd be like, let's go for
Absolutely.
heart first.
Yeah, and also like you don't have to go crazy, right? So even if you just have a little bit of liver, and I would definitely want it to be frozen before I blend it, cut it in small pieces, refreeze it for an hour or something. You can blend it and mix it into any ground meat mix. And then anything that's like heavily seasoned, right? So a
Mm,
bolognese, or I like to do stuffed poblanos, or if you do chilies or things like that, right? Like anything that's flavored, that's a
mm,
great place to start. I think that for if you already are having some organ meats or you want to kind of take it to the next level, I think that with preparing liver, like kind of front and center, a great place to start is just like with like chicken liver tacos, for example. Chicken livers are going to be more mild. It's a smaller animal, but uh, you can just cook those in a pan with whatever taco seasonings you would normally, right? If you use cumin, oregano, peppers, like things like that, then that has some really nice seasonings, and you can do all the things on tacos, right? You can do like some sour cream and avocado and like radishes and cilantro, all the seasonings that basically make up for a beautiful meal, right? Like when you have like just liver or something, it can be really overwhelming, but that's like part of a beautiful package
yeah.
that it's like, wait, you could try this. Like, this is so beautiful and like so appealing. And it's a part of something that's so much bigger. And then also I would just say, if you're just going to do lamb liver or beef liver, any liver sauteed, to make sure that you really have an acid. So your listeners probably already know this. They're, health conscious, but salt, of course, is not bad for us. And salt, I would say, is actually not only is it essential, but it's essential for protein digestion. And so really to salt it. That's why a well salted steak is just divine, right? Because we can also, I have a sense from having many kids in my home over the years that people would always say, oh my gosh, like my kid doesn't eat any meat, but they loved your hamburgers, they loved your meatballs, and they loved your whatever. And I'm always thinking to myself, like, you don't salt your meat. Like that's the difference between them eating my meat and your
Interesting.
meat, right?
Yeah.
Been so many birthday parties, because we did so many birthday parties on the beach, where I would bring meatballs and do sliders and stuff like that. We would have a little grill and stuff. And I had so many moms have told me over the years, like, my kids don't eat any meat, but they love this thing. And I'm like, okay, that's because I heavily season everything. And you're probably following the mainstream paradigm telling you that salt is bad for you, right? But it's actually, but it's so salting, of course, with liver. Liver is a very wet cut. So with a steak, or with chicken, this morning I salted a chicken before I left the house that I'm going to cook for dinner tonight, right? To like let that get into the juices, and it will retain moisture and it will make that chicken juicier when I cook it tonight. Liver is such a wet cut that if you salt it before it goes in the pan, it can release a lot of water. And what ends up happening is you kind of end up boiling your liver instead of searing it. And so you don't get like that nice brown caramelization. Now you have this like really bland, like grayish, dull meat that like kind of does not look appealing, and you're kind of nervous about it, right? So you don't want to, so I don't salt liver in advance. I will sear the liver. When I flip it over, I'll season the side that's been seared. And when I take it off, I'll season the other side. But seasoning it, and then of course adding some sort of acid. So this could be a tomato-based sauce, a lemon-based sauce, balsamic vinegar, something like really bright and acidic as a very simple sauce. Like the most common sauce in my house is like taking the liver out of the pan, beef liver, throwing in a knob of butter and squeezing a lemon into that butter and like letting it cook down and get to know each other and pouring that over the top with a little parsley garnish or something. This, like that lemon juice brightens things so much. It makes all the difference. So I think one time I was at an event with Hillary Boynton, her School of Lunch. Like every week she does, or every year she'll do like a week of like kind of ancestral Weston Price style cooking, everything from ferments to grains and organ meats. And one year we had somebody in the kitchen who was cooking the liver, and it wasn't me. And first he overcooked it, and then I was like, whoa, like let me step in here with all due respect. And so we sliced off this overcooked liver, and when it's overcooked, it can be like kind of dry and crumbly and have a more intense flavor. Yeah. And then like if it's just like a kind of rosy in the middle, it's going to have a much milder flavor. So keeping it mild, people are afraid, so they leave it on a little longer, right? But you end up kind of with worse liver in that case. So that's one thing. So then we sampled those differences, and then we sampled it with and without salt, right? And then we sampled it with the lemon juice over the top. And then like when people had that, they were like, this is so good. Wow. So I just like, if you can do that in your own kitchen where you experiment with these things, like that balsamic vinegar, like something like that, it just brightens it so much. And it really just like, and also I just feel like this whole thing, like I said, like I kind of come from a background of cooking, and I know a lot of people, even just a few years younger than me, have kind of missed out on this. I have a really dear friend, and she was telling me like, oh, one of the things I've learned from you is actually all the techniques of how to cook, because they, like every year, just like less and less cooking, right? So if your mom didn't cook, you haven't seen it, you don't really know all these things. I also studied cooking for many years, not formally, but just literally reading cookbooks cover to cover and like kind of studying them in that way. But we're kind of removed from these things. But I just think that like Sally Fallon, right? Like sauces are the thing that they don't take that long, but they make a meal, and they really make it feel like it's special, and it has some TLC in there, all that. So I would say like next level is like taking your mincemeat, like doing a beautiful like sort of like terrine and like pate and croûte, right? Like covering the whole thing in a brioche bread and baking it. And, like there's like, oh, you can take the whole, that is like a celebratory organ meat dish, right? Like you bring that kind of terrine to a party. It's like, this is like bust out the champagne, because like now we're like ready to party. Like this is amazing, right? So you can like definitely take your organ meats to like different levels, right? So we can just start with a blend, and like next is like kind of just having liver front and center and just appreciating the value of it and not going crazy with it, right? If you're thinking that the French are having a 5-6 ounce steak of liver, this is not something they're having every night of the week.
Exactly.
Like, this is not what we're talking about. And we're talking about something that's like a beautiful meal that we can like really like appreciate and lean into, and that we can enjoy, and then and then having a variety of beautiful meals in the course of our week. From diversity is so important in ecosystems and also for our body, and we can diversify across macronutrients, right? Like there's 2 different energy macronutrients, carbohydrates and fats. So we can diversify in those categories. And then even in the protein category, we can diversify across the different animals that we consume, right? There are so many animals from the land and the sea, and then we can diversify across the cuts. And I just think there's so much value in like thinking about how we can diversify at every level, right? Just to add so many things. And it's funny because if you spend too much time in the health space, like, oh, like these oxalates are going to kill you, and these lectins are going to kill you, and these this and that. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like my grandma was like 101 and like she ate all the food, like she ate bread. Oh, God forbid, like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
could that be? Like she baked, she had celebratory like cakes and desserts
Yeah.
or holidays. And it's just, I don't know. So I just like think that if we compartmentalize too much, it can kind of silo us off and like make us a little bit timid and fearful in different categories. But if we think about diversity and how we can diversify, and if we say like seasonal and local and all that, we can like really find the most diversity.
I agree. And I
So,
think that's the through line through everyone I've spoken to on this podcast. I think that's the through line, like whole foods, seasonal,
mhm.
and diversify, like you said. And that seems to be the key. Like just stay away from that kind of westernized processed rubbish that we're sold in the
Right,
supermarkets.
because that is actually like the complete opposite, right? That
Mm,
is like many, I think Michael Pollan says there's like 17,000 new foods introduced every year into the grocery
mm,
store, but
mm.
they're all the same thing. They're
Yeah,
just corn and soy derivatives mixed
exactly.
together with, some colorings, flavorings, and seasonings,
Mm,
unknown, all of them, right?
yeah.
But it's the same product. Like
Yeah.
90 something percent of the product is just corn and soy.
Gosh,
So, or
that's
like,
very true.
and wheat. So it's
Yeah,
like, there's actually it's the complete opposite of diversification is the
yeah.
whole middle of the grocery
That
store.
is so true.
17,000 new food
Yeah.
products every year that are all exactly
Wow.
the same thing.
Yeah.
They have different colored packages and they look like they could be different, but they're, yeah, all the same. So,
Yeah.
the real diversity is actually just like what's in our local environment.
And what I
Yeah.
love about everything you've just said is that you have tons of recipes. You have them on your website and you have them
Yes.
on Insta. You're most active on Instagram, right? So how can
I
people
have been
find
most active on
you?
Instagram. Yeah, I've started posting on Facebook. I would love to have a YouTube channel going because I actually feel like
Mm.
Instagram is really for short form content, like a
Yeah, I
minute
feel
or
like you could
something.
do
But I
long
feel like
form.
I need
Yeah,
like 10 minutes. Like, can we
you
like,
need
let's
time to
talk about gizzards.
explain,
Like,
cook.
let's talk about
Yes.
tripe. Like, let's talk about like this particular nutrient. So I really want to move into that kind of like longer format space. But I think that, uh, yeah, on my site, I have over 100 recipes at this point, and there's a lot on there. So I have it broken down into categories like liver, kidney,
Yes,
tripe,
I
and then you can like
noticed.
see like
Yeah.
how to purchase or how to prepare it, and then like recipes. But there's a lot of things that are not categorized. So you won't see gizzards, for example, but if you search for gizzards, you'll find a half dozen recipes
Perfect.
that you can
Perfect.
use,
So
for things
anybody
like
who
that.
doesn't know
So
how to cook or they don't know how to get started, just go to your website, go to your Instagram, they literally get involved. I know that you do workshops and
yeah, exactly.
you don't like to leave your audience hanging, like you like to take them by the
No,
hand
I
and like show
definitely
them everything, and you're so generous with your information. So I think people would get so much from you if they just kind of give you a follow and they just kind of get involved with you. I think that would be awesome.
thanks, Tam. Yeah, it's really fun. If you're interested in the world of organ meats, then definitely come find something that looks good to you and
Yeah.
looks good to your family, right? It doesn't have to be foreign. I think that starting also with just like the spices that your family's already familiar with. We do a lot of Persian cooking because of my husband. We do a lot of Portuguese type style, like Mediterranean type style dishes. So like using those same flavor profiles.
Mm.
My family, I have a lot of recipes on my organ meat sites that are like brains, for example, with sumac, or gizzards with dill, or like these are spices that we use all the time in Persian cooking, and I have them in my home and they're part of our rotation. And so they're things that my family's really familiar with already. And so by just incorporating a different protein or a slightly different texture, a different cut, right, then this is just like a diversity of on the question of like the age old question, what's for dinner, right?
Right. I
Like,
love
okay,
that.
we're going to do this, this different thing or this new thing, and then getting them involved, really engages, like helps get them engaged. So,
I love that. Well, do you know what?
but
This has been such a great conversation, and I've gotten so many tips from you. Like you're really a wealth of knowledge when it comes to organ meats. And I already have these ideas, and I'm already thinking about that liver. Like when you're talking about the liver, the lemon juice. Like I was already thinking, oh, I actually really would like to try that. So, I will be trying that. I actually have some liver in the freezer, so I'm probably going to get it out and get Corky cooking over the weekend. But I just want to say a huge thank you for being here, for chatting to me, and for sharing your knowledge with us. It's just been so valuable. So thank you so much.
oh, thanks for having me, Tam. It's such a pleasure.